It is Monday, the 16th of June. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick. Welcome to The Signal on CBC Radio 1. When the situation at home becomes intolerable, women and gender diverse people need a safe place, often with children in tow. So what's the demand for shelters and transitional housing these days, and how can we better support those who have to seek it out? That's the topic today. Lots of folks on deck to join in on today's discussion, so we'll go around the table here in the studio first. Joining me in the studio, we have Laura Winter, Lead Executive Officer with Stella Circle. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having this conversation.
Bridget Clarke is Advocacy Coordinator with St. John's Status of Women's Council. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Megan Pottle is First Light's Coordinator of Residential and Indigiqueer Inclusion. Thanks for coming in today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And Saadat Usman is a consultant with Sakina Canada. Thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having us.
Also on the line, we have Rebecca Larkham, Supportive Living Coordinator with the Mokami Status of Women's Council in Happy Valley Goose Bay. Hello.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting us out today.
So I want to get some initial thoughts from all of you before we go any further. And Laura, I introduced you first, so maybe I'll start with you as well. What's your sense of the profile of shelter in this community right now, and how much demand there is and how close we are to meeting that demand?
So Stella Circle operates a range of programs across housing, mental health, and employment services. And some of our programs are specifically for women and gender diverse folks. We actually operate the Naomi Center shelter for young women aged 18 to 29, and it's the only one of the kind in the province. And we just see a massive need there. So right now, we're actually turning away 4 times more people than we're able to admit into that shelter. So I think that stat in and of itself gives you a sense of need. In terms of the landscape, historically, we've seen folks staying around 20 days in that shelter, and it's up around 40 right now. And again, this is serving young women, young gender diverse folks experiencing homelessness, but also coming with a whole range of needs around experiences of violence, experiences of mental health challenges. And so we do offer a roof over people's heads through the shelter, but there's a whole lot more wraparound support offered in that environment. So I think it's important to say that as well. And the other piece I think that really speaks to what I'm sure everyone around the table knows about the housing context in St. John's and across the province right now is about the challenges in finding folks supportive housing after shelter stays. So back in 2020, not that long ago, 80% or so of people were able to exit that shelter into permanent housing arrangements that met their need. And right now we're at about 50%. That's incredibly challenging. That means young women, young gender diverse folks are leaving that setting and perhaps going back into experiences of violence, unsafe circumstances. And again, this is with the massive support of our incredible staff at Stella Circle and our partners across the community sector that are working so hard to try to support people in their housing journeys.
And just to clarify, in terms of what Stella Circle offers and what you see, are we primarily talking about people who have to flee domestic circumstances? We all first and foremost think of domestic violence, or is it folks in all circumstances who need a
Thank you for clarifying that. So the Naomi Center shelter offers support to young women and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. And so that is the criteria. It's not a domestic violence shelter, though certainly large numbers of people that access that service do have some experiences of violence that fall outside of that the shelter system that exists for domestic violence.
Okay. Bridget, I want you to add to the picture from your perspective at the St. John's Status of Women's Council.
Sure. So with the programming that we operate with the St. John's Status of Women Council, Marguerite's Place is our supportive living program. And what that means is that it is a bit of a longer term housing model that we specifically house people who are 30 and over who are living without dependents in their care. And our criteria is women and gender diverse people who are requiring a bit more support in kind of a safer, secure building than if you were to be kind of navigating on your own, trying to secure housing perhaps in the private market. So that housing is affordable. There is staff around the clock to help folks kind of work through their own goals and develop safety plans and support plans that work for them. And it's in a building where there is support kind of through the staff at Marguerite's Place, but also through our other programs that operate, like the Women's Center, like our Safer Substance Use Program, and like SHOP, Safe Harbor Outreach Project. So it's independent units, and we have 8 in that program, but there's also access to communal living spaces and programming throughout the week where folks can engage with each other, kind of talk through things that are going on, access supports in that way. And similarly, we are seeing, a huge demand, particularly with that program, because folks can stay for up to 3 years. We actually intentionally don't keep a wait list because the demand is so high, and also because it can create kind of a false sense of expectation about when folks might be able to access a program like this. So particularly over the last couple of years, we've seen that, need increase significantly, especially since kind of the social and economic fallouts of the pandemic. The needs that we've been seeing since the inception of this program over a decade ago have really only grown in recent years.
So you mentioned that people can take advantage of this system for up to 3 years. You want to give, I think, the clients that you see as much time as they need to make what is a huge transition in their lives. At the same time, you do want to help them move along and make that transition. How do you manage to balance those two circumstances? So you have to kind of nurture, but also nudge a little, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging, but it's also a really individual experience. It depends where folks are at in terms of what their needs are, what their own goals are. Something that is really a critical part of this program is it is a harm reduction focused supportive living program. So what that means is that people don't need to be sober or well to live there. And so sometimes folks might have goals that are related to their wellness or their substance use, but often they don't. And so during the course of that 3 years, it's really about kind of working with folks to determine what they might need in a couple of years' time to really have a sense of stability and security. Oftentimes it comes down to things around maintaining affordable and accessible housing beyond a program like this, but also has to do with building networks of support, certainly in the community sector and through healthcare, but often with family and friend connections as well, relationship building, skill building, all that kind of thing.
Okay. Megan, tell me about the clients that you see and what you're able to offer and what the demand is like.
So we're on the cusp of kind of opening doors at our new transitional housing project on Water Street. And we've also been overseeing a 15-unit affordable living program for several years now. So in the work that we do with our resident relatives and community, we've really tried to approach it through a lens of cultural inclusion. And I'm just listening to Bridget speak a little bit about Marguerite's Place programming. I think sometimes when people think about transitional housing as like a model, we think about it as there's going to be a definitive outcome of re-entering private market housing. And I think sometimes we have to check ourselves on that, because one of the pieces of engaging with folks in their healing journeys through the lenses of programming like this really does look like supporting them in reaching their goals around their housing, their housing journey and what that might look like for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the best outcome for everybody is re-entering private market housing. Mm-hmm. It might mean that through this journey and the support in building your bundle and growing your skills and knowing yourself more truly with a lens of support, more support is what you need on an ongoing basis. And so that's some of where we really see a lot of the gaps in our community, I think, because a lot of transitional housing and supportive living models that we do see in our community currently there's a time limitation to those. And when people are facing kind of the intersecting complexities of like lived experiences of violence, carrying trauma histories with them through their housing journeys, the presence of poverty in their lives, the economy as it is currently. I think it's important for us to think critically about the fact that we're not all meant to do it alone. And when you don't have, a supportive network of like family or close kinship, then like how does that get built? And how do people engage with you to support you in building that and maintaining that as we move forward? So that is one of the biggest factors for our resident relatives and community is how do we engage people in community and how do we help people find meaningful connection in community?
Big job. Sorry, it's a big job and a long-term job. You have to look at long horizons sometimes.
Absolutely. And so at First Light, that is one of the pieces I think of like community engagement that we strive for in our programming. It exists kind of not just in the realm of housing and homelessness work, but cultural reintegration work, language work, healthcare navigation work, access to mental health services, and addiction support through a lens of peer support-led and Indigenous-led facilitation. So, we've been in this place for a while now where all of our kind of frontline staff, like everybody is a cultural support worker. We talked about for a long time about like what cultural support workers do, but everybody is a cultural support worker. You're a housing cultural support worker. You're a justice cultural support worker. You're an elders cultural support worker. You're a mental health cultural support worker, right? Like this is because that is the lens that we are approaching our work from, because connection to community and connection to identity and connection to culture is the root. And when we bring people into the circle, that supports them in facilitating their own healing.
Saadat, I introduced you initially as a consultant with Sakina Canada. Mm-hmm. And before we talk a little bit more specifically about your work, tell us more about the organization. So
Sakina Canada is a transitional housing shelter. It's not like, what you call it, it's not like an emergency shelter. So what they do is, just like Megan, so we look at support from like a culturally sensitive approach, because yes, culture is very important, right? And we find like Sakina, when they moved to Newfoundland, before they came, there was a lot of cases. They had remote clients and the number kept increasing. So there is a why. Why are people not reaching out to like the mainstream shelters? And from my understanding, when Sakina started, many Muslim women and cultural women wouldn't reach out to mainstream shelters. And this is not like, of course, not everyone. Some people are comfortable in mainstream shelters. Others are very cultured. Like me, I am a very cultural woman, so I wouldn't fit in. So Sakina came in, and there was a story of a person who was in a mainstream shelter, and she would have her little quiet space to say her prayer. And people would yank her hijab off, and there was abuse in the shelter. So people like that end up just either running away from the shelter or going back to the same situation, and in most cases, like they wouldn't even reach out at all. So when these cases started rising in Newfoundland, Sakina thought, oh, well, there is a need, right? Let's have a home. We call them a home. We call them homes. So let's have a home in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Sakina established a home, and ever since there has been like a lot of clients being served. Yeah.
Okay. What does the demand look like?
The demand is very high, and sometimes there's still this sensitization. There's still the fear that people don't want to reach out, and we would have sometimes remote clients that they would ask like, are you going to be able to protect me? Or would you be able to accommodate me? Or, all of those fears that people have. So I am here to emphasize, to tell them that it's okay. Sakina is a very safe place. We do have the security. The security for CCTV. We have staff, though we don't have a 24/7 staff, but the footage is run all through the time. It's a very safe space, and we are culturally sensitive. We provide food. Like if I wanted halal food, I'm in Sakina. The grocery list for the week, I would ask people, what do you want specifically? They give me a list, and I'll get them halal food. So no one's starving while they are away. So it's, very accommodating.
Okay. Rebecca, thanks for your patience there on the line. Hi.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit more about the current demand and what you're able to provide in terms of shelter and resources at the Mokami Status of Women Council.
Yeah, so here at Mokami, we believe in safe housing, but it's more than a place to sleep. At Mokami, right now, our supportive living houses 8 women and gender diverse folks full time. We do offer the 24/7 wraparound care. We're supporting women and gender diverse as they navigate violence, trauma, poverty, and substance use. But like everyone else has stated already, the demand is just so high, and we're seeing this bottleneck scenario here in supportive living. Our program is always full, and when residents are ready to transition, we have nowhere safe or appropriate to transition them out to. So we're seeing people stay longer than they might want or need, while also leaving others in crisis. This, in turn, puts pressure on the whole system, and we're leaving a lot of vulnerable people without options here in Labrador.
Is it an issue as well that in an area where the communities are relatively small, that the resources become that much more strained?
100%. And, here in Labrador, we're seeing communities even go without supports. I mean, you look at the south coast of Labrador, there are no shelters down there for any women or gender diverse folks.
And what do you do, and you and your staff responding to situations like that in Labrador? There's only so much you can do. I'm sure you want to do more. How do you parcel out your time and, for that matter, protect yourselves to make sure everybody can offer the best they can in a system that's constantly falling short?
100%. Supportive housing only works if we're fully staffed and resourced. Our team is doing the 24-hour support, but this is complex work. Our staff are stretched. That's the reality of it. We're relying on our community partnerships. The Libra House here in town, the Labrador Friendship Center, the Housing Hub, the government announcement of the Supportive Service Hub. But we're at 100% capacity.
Okay. So a number of questions and issues arise from some of the stories that you guys have just been telling us now to start the show. Laura, tell us a little bit more about the Naomi Center and I guess the profile of a client who might be there. I think some of us might have trouble differentiating between one set of clients and another and the purpose of one system or one set of supports and another.
Thanks for that. I'd say there's no one profile, and we all work as a community together. I think it's important to say, and I hope folks can get a sense of that partnerships are at the core of this work. And it takes both a continuum of services and a continuum of types of housing and supports for women and gender diverse people. And it also takes specific supports around, as has been mentioned, like cultural specific support. So at Naomi Center, again, we're serving young women and gender diverse folks between the ages of 18 and 29. And the criteria to enter that shelter is that you're experiencing homelessness. We are seeing massive amounts of violence being experienced in that population, challenges around addiction and folks that are active in their drug use. And certainly we so welcome people to come in when they're experiencing that. We do work from a harm reduction model and we work from a person-centered model. I think there's been a shift for us at Naomi Center. At one point, we were thinking we're a housing first shelter. We want people to move on to housing. But the fact of the matter is we're a relationship first shelter. It's about seeing what the needs of the people that come through the door are and trying to wrap the supports around them. We're really lucky at Stella Circle that we have programming that we can in-house and through our partners meet people's needs where they're at. So we serve 1,500 people a year across various programs at Stella Circle. So when somebody comes into Naomi Center, yes, they're there to access the shelter, but perhaps they'd also like to access mental health supports. Perhaps, once they become stabilized, they're looking for housing. We operate 133 units of affordable housing at Stella Circle, so we're able to, at times, meet that need when we have openings. And we're actually currently developing 15 new units of transitional housing, specifically for women and gender diverse folks. And that is going to be targeting people that are coming through both the Naomi Center shelter and their experiences and others in community with similar experiences, as well we are building those units and prioritizing women and gender diverse folks with criminal justice involvement, because there is a massive gap in our system in the province to serve that population, and they deserve supports that meet their needs. And it's transitional, again, because we need that continuum, as has been talked about. We need emergency shelter, yes. We need permanent housing, but then we need that place for people to land when they need those wraparound supports in-house and they're at their doorsteps. And so that's what we're developing. We're quite lucky to have federal funding through the Rapid Housing Initiative to build those units. And the beauty of it is, again, from that person-centered perspective, there's no time limit. So transitional might mean a couple months for one person, and it might mean years for another, and we're going to be able to meet those needs and really hopefully meet people where they're at. So again, we got the funds and we really targeted that population, knowing the gaps in the whole system for women and gender diverse folks, and knowing specifically that women with criminal justice histories are uniquely underserved in this province, and just wanting to meet that need through that, and then the partnership with our own Just Us Women's Center program that serves that population.
Okay, so I think we still, it's almost like the terminology that we use tends to be outdated, because we still, the word or the phrase we hear most often is shelter, which suggests a roof over your head, a bed, and a meal. But Bridget, that's only square one. It's up to organizations like yours and like everybody gathered around this table, the organizations, to step in, I guess, where the rest of society has let these people down.
I think I want to recognize something that Laura mentioned about the continuum of housing, and also what Rebecca mentioned in terms of the bottleneck. So I think that, yeah, absolutely, Laura, to your point around there is a need for a wide and diverse spectrum of housing options for people that is gender responsive, that is culturally responsive, that it is safe for different groups of people in different settings at different times in their life, depending on what they're needing of, if it is emergency shelter, if it is a little bit longer, if it is, kind of more of that supportive living program where people are in need of kind of really solid wraparound supports in an environment that they can settle into for a period of time. But I think the kind of other end of that spectrum, and also to your point, Megan, earlier about moving into the private market is certainly not working for folks, or not available, or just not reasonable for a lot of people, is the piece that's kind of perhaps one of the big gaps right now, is having permanent housing that is community-based, or that is at least affordable, which often goes hand in hand. So permanent housing that doesn't have the kind of time restraints, that might not have some of the even parameters around a supportive living program like ours in terms of age limit or whether or not you have dependents in your care. But permanent housing that people can settle into for life, and build those networks, or sustain and continue those networks of family, of community, and really be able to do so in a way that's affordable, that's safe, that's accessible, that meets their needs, that's well maintained. And oftentimes housing providers in the community sector are kind of best suited to be able to do that housing provision and kind of set people up in a way that might not be as intensive in terms of built-in supports, but is nearby in terms of supports that people know are available to them. So I think that is kind of, when you think about, back to your question around where we're kind of failing folks the most right now, especially in light of how the housing crisis is unfolding in real time, that's a really critical piece of it.
Okay, Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about the scene in Happy Valley Goose Bay when it comes to affordable housing, and for any opportunities that do or don't exist for people to be able to transition into more independent living conditions?
Unfortunately, right now we are seeing here at the Women's Center, we're seeing people stay longer than they really need to. Housing is full. There's just no other way to put it. We're seeing people back out on the streets. We have a very high homeless population, especially in these summer months. We'll see a higher population here. And ultimately, there's just nowhere. We're known as the big land, and we have land available, but there's no homes.
Is there any lobbying effort or push towards that, or have you been able to strike up good, productive
I would like to
conversations
think,
with the authorities?
yeah, I would like to think so. I mean, there's some behind the scenes stuff happening, but right now, if we could see some flexible funding for the beginning of this process, that would be a huge help.
Okay. All right, before we go any further, we have Zahraa Rizvi on the line from Toronto. She's also with Sakina Canada, and she can tell us more about the organization from a national perspective. Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I was listening on the conversation. I'm based here in Ontario, and I work in Sakina Canada as the program manager, and obviously the need was there in St. John, so this is our newest project within the organization. Along with that, we have other transitional homes across Canada, food banks, and we're working with mental health and new immigrants and refugees. Definitely, as Laura has said and Rebecca has said, my colleague has shared. There is a need, and we are very well aware of that. And so at Sakina Canada, we are trying to introduce a program for these women and children from this cultural sensitive perspective. We started up as a Muslim women shelter for women and children, but then as we saw the need grew and as our remote casework spread apart in different parts of Canada, we found out that there is the need for just all the women to be helped by us. We do have a niche program with the Muslim cultural perspective to it. So we have, our homes are equipped with that perspective that the Muslim women can feel safe and can practice their own faith and religion over there. We provide them with, life skills. We provide them with workshops to understand the Canadian culture. Sometimes new immigrants or refugees, for them, all this setup is pretty daunting. So we make sure that we have caseworkers and counselors and therapists available for them. So this transitional home in St. John that we have opened up is run as a confidential, like a group home or a shelter home in which women and children come and then they work towards their goals, and then we hope for them to transition out of them. As it has been mentioned before, the affordable housing, the cost of living, food insecurity is everything that is helping a lot of folks in Canada. So our organization is more focused towards helping women and children. We are always looking for new opportunities. We want to partnership with other organizations in Newfoundland as well. We also want to promote, educating women to stand up for themselves and learn the ways of Canadian living and adapt. I would take this platform to spread the word for Sakina Canada, and you can visit our website, sakinacanada.com, or a toll-free number 1-888-671-3446 to reach out to Sakina and to other organizations as well, or the nonprofits who are working with us. If they can, refer clients if they don't have the capacity for it.
Okay. Thanks so much for providing that profile for us, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
That is Zahraa Rizvi in Toronto. She's with Sakina Canada, as is Saadat Usman, who's a consultant with Sakina Canada here in St. John's. When did you begin that work with here in the city?
Actually, only a couple of weeks ago. So I was a staff, a Sakina Canada staff before becoming a consultant. Then I started my own nonprofit. And it's a good working environment, or generally a good environment when, an old staff comes back to work to promote the mandate. So we have, I see that our visions align. Sakina, I am the person who approaches people from, no, we're going to help you. But how can we help? How can I be an ally? What do you want? And I find that that's exactly what Sakina is about. So when they reached out and say, be our eye on the ground in St. John's, how do we promote this? How do we serve people? I'm like, yes, I'm all for it.
As someone who's arrived from outside the community and seen it with fresh eyes, what are your first impressions of the people that you're working with in the Muslim community here in St. John's?
Yeah, it's people. These are people who are trying to integrate, but as you know, with culture, it's very difficult. This is like letting go of who you are in a way, and that is what I find like in the mainstream Canada. It's like, okay, you want to be Canadian, you have to, it's unspoken, but you have to dump everything that you know to be Canadian. So but that shouldn't be. I could integrate me. This is me. I was raised with very beautiful culture. I am respectful. I am a good human being, and this is what I find in the Muslim community. And some of the programmings for integration, you find they're telling you, oh, this is how you do it. I'm like, okay, what is wrong with the way I was doing it before? As long as it's not harming anyone. So I find that the people here sometimes get caught up between what am I supposed to lose? What am I supposed to hold on to? What should I? So then you find there's just so much conflict and people just don't know what to do. So I find, yes, these are people in most cases who are very peaceful people, they just want to be good neighbors, good friends. But we need, yes, facilities, we need support. And those that are in harmful situations, they need programs like the Sakina Canada, like the Stella Circle, and I mean, amazing work. I've only been here 3 years, but I'm very much about social justice. So I quite know a little bit about all the work that you do, and kudos to everyone. But yes, we do need that support. The Muslim community, the migrant community, there is that, we do need support, we do need resources. And you find that it's very challenging to find integration when you're a newcomer. First of all, there is no financials because you don't have the credit record, and then it's just so much barriers that people need to be met where they are, or maybe at least halfway. Say, how can we help you? How can we support you, just like Sakina is doing right now?
Megan, from a very different perspective, I wonder if some of that rings a bell with you, because women and gender diverse people who need help, who need immediate shelter and then further long-term help, that's a big challenge as it is. How much more of a challenge is it for clients coming from an Indigenous background?
Yeah, in working with the urban Indigenous community, we see, I guess, significant challenges often with navigating the shelter system or emergency housing in general. Because of the structures of many of our systems, there's a lot of colonial legacy that gets carried through, a lot of systemic discrimination that gets carried through systemic racism. And, for many people, it feels very institutional navigating the shelter system. Again, it's this kind of like an expectation to unlearn a little bit about who you are in order to fit. And when we see people, particularly, I often talk about, our service demographic, when we talk about the urban Indigenous population in St. John's, there are many folks in our community who are from St. John's or who have grown up in urban settings, or are urban Indigenous folks. But a lot of people are kind of urban transplants. I'm an urban transplant. I grew up in rural Labrador. A lot of the folks who we serve have grown up in more rural settings and have come to St. John's. And so navigating systems, navigating community when you don't have, the same kind of kinship to rely on, or general connections and sense of community to rely on to figure out kind of where do I go from here? What spaces are safe for me? You sometimes will end up in spaces that demonstrate to you very quickly that they're not safe. So that is a challenge that we navigate often with folks in our community. Unfortunately, because of kind of the disproportionate experiences of violence that have been experienced by Indigenous women and Indigenous queer Two-Spirit folks, most of the folks that we serve have significant lived experiences of violence from a housing and homelessness demographic. And we used to live in a sheltered climate where if we were serving folks in the community who were in general shelter population, and they were finding those spaces very overwhelming, a lot of trauma triggering happening, maybe just not necessarily because they're actively experiencing violence in those settings, but perhaps just being in the presence of certain people, being in the presence of people using substances in certain ways, being in the presence of violence between other people, those things making them feel very unsafe because of their lived experiences. We used to be in a place in our shelter system where we could reach out then on behalf of those people and with those people to shelters that were targeted to intimate partner violence or targeted to lived experiences of violence, and with some kind of advocating. If somebody has a history of intimate partner violence, we were able to support them in getting a shelter statement that maybe felt safer and more congruent to their needs. In the current climate, that's not the case anymore because every shelter is overrun. Every shelter is turning people away every day.
Okay.
So.
Rebecca, in terms of the challenges facing clients in Labrador, do you recognize some of what Megan's talking about there in trying to make resources that best align with the needs of Indigenous people?
Oh, 100%. Not on purpose, but just the realities of living in Labrador right now. All 8 of our units are filled with Indigenous population. So we're seeing, we're trying to import or bring back some more land-based cultural resources. But again, everything, we're seeing the higher cost of living here in Labrador. Everything is at a higher cost, and trying to get stuff for the girls on the go is that much more expensive again versus being elsewhere in Canada.
Okay. We're joined on the line now by Marlene Butler. She's chair of the Saltwater Community Association in Bonavista. Hello.
Hi, Jamie.
First of all, tell us about the Saltwater Community Association and the goals that you've set.
Well, we're just a small organization. We operate out of Bonavista, but we have a quite an extensive reach. We've done a lot of different things over the years, food hamper programs and different things, and that kind of led us, actually, Jamie, to some of the work we're doing now with transitional housing. We could not get a women's shelter on the Bonavista Peninsula, sadly. There wasn't any funding, and we've been trying to do that over the last 4 years. And it's just very difficult to get any funding from Newfoundland and Labrador Housing or from Canada Mortgage and Housing. So we've kind of given up on the shelter perspective, and now we're focusing on a transitional house that we can have women who are fleeing domestic violence, when they come out of a shelter, give them that safe place to live and their families.
So still on the subject of a shelter, if you've been unable to establish one on the Bonavista Peninsula, what's a woman or someone who needs shelter immediately in an emergency situation, what's the nearest place they can go?
Marystown or Gander, from what we understand, there's just nothing on the Bonavista Peninsula whatsoever.
That's a couple of hours at least, isn't it? That's 3 hours, yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's very sad, that they have, in the absence of this, a lot of times that these women and their families stay in the situations they're in, apparently, because they have no place to go to.
So tell us about the transitional property that you have, you're trying to establish. How far have you gotten on that front?
Well, we raised $10,000 back in 2023 from a radiothon that we had, and from that, we bought this little house in Trinity Bay North, and we're trying to renovate it to turn it into a transitional home. So it's been a daunting task. We did have a small donation of $15,000, and that helps towards the cost of electrical and plumbing. And then we had some of those supplies donated as well from companies in St. John's. So we're trying to work towards maybe raising $50,000 later this year through an online auction. And hopefully that'll help us get the house established and get it ready for someone to move in, because there's certainly no shortage of people wanting those kind of spaces.
So you're very much working from the ground up. You must have given some thought as well to, once you're actually able to get that property open and make it available for people who need the space, you must have given some thought as well to how you go about budgeting for and providing the various services and supports that they'll need.
Yes, we've got given some thought, but we haven't. That's not at the forefront of our minds right now. Trying to get it renovated, and I think it'll all work out. We have had some conversations with some people in the community as far as community health for supports for that. So we kind of know a rough idea of what it looks like, and then we'll delve into it a little bit further once we get more advanced on the property.
Okay, it's interesting to hear from someone who's kind of starting it from scratch, basically. Laura, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what someone would do if they're in the situation Marlene is in, and you're really just getting started, and you're trying to set your priorities and trying to set up the best support you can with limited means.
It sounds like they're doing it in terms of listening to the needs of community and listening to the voices of lived expertise and what people are saying they need as they build out those services. I think that's the most important thing you can do. And funding is a challenge no matter what phase you're at. It's definitely more challenging when you're starting out. We're lucky, as I noted, to have some federal funds to build those 15 new units of transitional housing. But there's a massive gap here in terms of funding for supports and for staffing. That money is not as readily available. And so we see these massive pots of money available at the federal level that are sometimes able to be accessed here, sometimes not, to actually do the bricks and mortar. But the then what of we know people need more than the physical space. They need the support. They need the staffing. And with that said, I want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone working frontline in the housing sector and across the community sector. Right now, it is an incredibly challenging time. The units are not available that people need. The resources are not there, and the need is greater than it's ever been. So people are up against a lot, and also to acknowledge the incredible skills and strength of the people who are living this day in and day out. To be experiencing homelessness now in our community is a unique and challenging experience, and they're particularly women and gender diverse folks. The amount of skills, strength, knowledge, wisdom that they have in navigating these circumstances is just incredible. And so I just want to say that. And it sounds like the folks there in Bonavista are trying to honor that as they move forward. So that's probably the most important thing they can do.
Marlene, are you still on the line?
Oh, I'm here. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about, it can't be just you. You must have a board or a set of volunteers who are all putting this together. And this is a long-term effort. You're in it for the long haul, I guess.
Well, it's a long-term commitment by us. We're all volunteers. Nobody gets paid. And it is because we really believe that it's such an important issue, not just in our community, but communities across the province and across Canada, that's not necessarily being tackled. But it's frustrating, Jamie, because we had a young girl last year and then the year before that died at the hands of, from domestic violence, we'll say. Let's coin it like that. And it's sad that they're from your community, and how do their families feel? I mean, they've got to carry this with them every day. We're just trying to mitigate the issue and try to give them a safe home. That's the least we can do as volunteers or as a community, to try to recognize the issues that are going out in the community, and how can we're not going to contribute to them, we're going to help in some way.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you well.
Thank you, young man.
That is Marlene Butler. She's in Bonavista with the Saltwater Community Association. Bridget, do you hear similar stories from people from other communities that where resources are even fewer or stretched even thinner than they are in St. John's about it's tough the smaller the town gets, and in this province there's a lot of them?
Sure. I mean, our mandate and where we operate is in the region of the St. John's metro area, but Rebecca, for example, is one of the other status of women councils across the province, and especially folks who are in rural and remote areas, like our members with PANSAO, the Provincial Action Network of the Status of Women. That's our kind of collective, know certainly better than we do about what those experiences are like. So we're fortunate to be able to learn from really what's going on in other parts of the province from them. But I recognize pieces of what both Marlene and Laura have said around funding. And I think that is, although the experiences differ, urban versus rural and remote and coastal and northern, some similarities in terms of shared experience exist. And I do think some of that is around funding. Certainly supportive housing is about offering support and programs and care for folks, but also, it's about maintaining a house and a property as well, right? And folks who are listening on from home, maybe, or from their cars or from work or wherever, understand that themselves in terms of managing cost of living. So when you look at funding models, we are not in the same place where we were 4, 8, 12 years ago. Cost of insurance, for example, has quadrupled in the last couple of years when you think about heat and light and snow clearing and cost of food and all of those other practical things that keep a program that is connected to housing running. It can be challenging or even unsustainable, really, to be able to keep those things going, and certainly recognizing the staff who are running those programs who are also experiencing the rising cost of living like the rest of us. So it's a really particularly challenging time, and I would say, even though it's not my place to say, that in rural and remote areas that that is happening kind of in an exacerbated way compared to town.
Right. Rebecca, do you find that basically the cost of everything is increasingly becoming a big issue for organizations like yours?
100%. We see everything, our food, even to operate a small craft, we can't run off to Walmart or Costco or Dollarama. We're having to go to these small, and we love to do that. We want to be supporting these small businesses here in Labrador, but on the other hand, we're still only given a certain amount of funds.
Okay. We actually not that far from the end of the show. The hour often flies by when we're having a good discussion. I wonder, with all the issues that have been raised here and some of the things that we've talked about, if any of you have a particular message you'd like to deliver to not just to your own clients, but to the larger public, and what you'd like people to know, or anything you'd like to change in terms of the perception of women and gender diverse folks who have to seek shelter and have to transition their lives. Megan, I'll start with you.
I think one of the most prominent things that stands out for me in that regard currently is just the rise in gender-based hate that has happened kind of across our country in the last while. When we look at kind of the attitude shift that has happened towards gender diverse people in our community over the last couple of years, and we look at, increased reports of violence happening in our communities and across Canada, I think not having kind of a responsive system that meets that increased need where it is, it really makes, as a queer person in community, it makes me feel scared for my peers. It really does. I hope that as we move forward, our systems can figure out ways to be more responsive to kind of the intersecting needs that exist in our community. For Indigenous queer folks in community, when we look at the presence of violence for folks, for Indigenous women, it is 20% higher for women in the rest of society, and for Indigenous queer folks, it is 20% higher still than the femme population for Indigenous folks. So, it's drastic. The need's drastic. The risks are very real, and there has been a shift. There really has. So,
how much of that do you think is largely unseen? I wonder. It's just not something we hear about in the news, right?
I think we're hearing a lot about it in the news in lots of ways, in the sense of, on a kind of international scale, we're seeing a lot of hate that is specifically targeted. We're seeing policies come into play across Canada in school systems that are denying gender diverse kids a right to live authentically under the guise of parental rights, I think it depends on what pieces you listen to, right? When we talk about it not being talked about, I think it doesn't get talked about as directly, or as it gets talked about strategically. And so I think that's where it becomes really important to apply a critical lens. When we look at how news outlets report about crimes committed by Indigenous people, for example. When we look at how, we talk about the protests that are happening currently, when we look at what's happening in our community every day, when we look at responses to pride in our community when they take a stand on certain issues. I think that the messages are really, really clear if we look critically and we think critically. And so I always encourage people to take a step back and really kind of like think critically about what it is they're taking in from community, from the media, from our news, because the picture is, the story tells itself if we pay attention.
Okay. Laura, from your perspective at Stella Circle, I wonder what message would you like to get out there, and what would you like people to understand about the work you're doing and the people that you work with?
I think we're very much speaking in a bubble on this show of folks that are in the community sector and care deeply about these issues. I think there's a bigger question here for every person listening about what kind of community you want to live in, about how you want people to be treated, and what kind of critical lens you're bringing to life and to the world around you. I think when we're speaking about issues that impact women and gender diverse folks, including homelessness, including violence, including marginalization, we think it's the responsibility of the folks sat around this table to solve them in their organizations. It is not. We all have a responsibility to challenge stigma, to work to have a different kind of society here where these issues are no longer issues. And so I think that's the piece. Stella Circle is a social justice organization, and that means that we imagine a better world and we all want to live in it. And so I think that's something for the folks listening to consider. If you're outside of this sector, you're not connected to community, we still all have a role to play in our interpersonal lives with folks around challenging that stigma, around challenging violence when it shows up, and checking in with people in our communities, and just showing that care for each other.
Okay. Bridget, any final thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on I think a piece really of what a few folks have said so far, but particularly the term Laura used around stigma, and just recognizing that this conversation is an opportunity to reflect on this kind of phrase that we hear sometimes about who is deserving of access to services like the ones that we might work with or that our organizations operate. And the reality is that everyone is deserving of safety on their terms. And that has a lot to do with housing. It has a lot to do with safety in relationships and in community. And when we think about services and supports that people should be able to access and can access, no one is more or less deserving, and safety does get to be defined by people on their own terms, and that's something that everyone deserves.
Okay. Saadat, I wonder if you have any final thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, I want to tell folks to pay attention. Pay attention to the people in your lives. Pay attention to the community. Build community. One thing I noticed, like it's a trend now, people are isolating themselves. It's like almost encouraged. But when you see, if you have a community, if you have a support system, and you find that something's off about someone because you see them every day or almost every day, then you find that, okay, something's wrong. Most often, I don't know about statistic of this, but I have heard that there are, like most people who are, the more isolated they are, the more they're prone to the gender-based violence and all of these issues. So we need to pay attention, especially to kids. We need to, when you see a switch, I'm a mom, I'm like, okay, on top of it, a change in behavior, a kid comes back home sad, or maybe they walk straight to their room. What's up? Give them some time, have a chat with them, what's going on. And when it comes to women, especially in like marriages and some cultures, if a woman is experiencing abuse and she wants to leave, it's like, oh, she wants to break the family. I would rather raise my kids by myself, and I'm lucky to be in a healthy relationship. I would rather be a single mom than have my kids see me go through all of this abuse, because it comes full circle, right? It has a ripple effect. The kid is going to grow up and see that is normalized. That is what I see. This is what my environment is. And subconsciously, we're teaching them what is okay. If a kid grows up and sees their mom being beaten every day, then, okay, maybe that's how women should be treated. And then we see that this cycle will keep going on and on. So people, please speak up when you see something wrong. Address it. When you see, and let's take away the stigma. That's a major issue. People are really afraid to come up because the stigma, oh, she is divorcee, or she is, all of the stigmas around it.
Okay. Rebecca, we're out of time, but I'd like to thank you for joining us on the line this afternoon.
Not a problem.
Okay. And thank you all here around the table for joining me for this discussion today. That is it for today's show. If you missed any of today's conversation or you want to recommend it to a friend, all our episodes are available on the CBC Listen app, also at the CBC Newfoundland and Labrador YouTube channel as well. If you have thoughts about today's topic, you can leave us an email at thesignal@cbc.ca or leave us a voicemail at 709-576-5260. Coming up tomorrow, it's Gardening Day. I will talk to you then. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick. Thanks for listening.